Good morning and welcome back. It is now Tuesday, October the 11th, and it is another beautiful morning out here. We did have some wind and some rain last night, but it didn't amount to a whole lot. We got about 1 to 2 millimeters, depending on the exact spot. Just enough to get the tip of your boots a little bit wet here this morning, but overall, pretty minor. But what it might do is it might drive a little bit more volunteer to germinate. You can see this spot in this barley field that had been hailed has had a lot of volunteer, but it did get sprayed out with Blackhawk about 2 weeks ago. But you can see there is a little bit of regrowth starting to occur down here. Some of this is new germination. Some of it is plants that had poor contact to begin with. But overall, it's very, very minor. And at this point, I'm going to say it is certainly not worth spraying again. I mean, it's, by the end of this week, we're going to be halfway through October, and we really have not had a killing frost yet. But it's got to happen sooner or later. Here in this barley field, you can see we still have a fair bit of volunteer in here, not nearly as thick as some of the more hailed fields, but probably still a good idea to get this under control if we aren't getting a frost at any time soon. But you can see we still have straw bales in this field that still need to be removed. You don't particularly want to be spraying over them and endangering your booms. Well, here's a fairly dense patch of foxtail in a field, and you can see we got some of the older, like rosettes, established plants here. So these are biennials or perennials here, basically coming up in a nice clump. So these guys have produced all this seed that you see here on the ground. It blows around throughout the field, and that's how it basically spreads by sticking to animals or blowing around in the wind. And you can see around it here, there's just an absolute mat of young foxtail. So this stuff is very, very small. You can see it is an absolutely tiny target hit that's only about 1.5 inches tall, and those leaves are not even 1/16 of an inch wide. They're about 1 millimeter. So very, very small. To get good control on these guys, you have to use a fairly high water rate with glyphosate, but this is the time to get them when they're small like this in the fall. Once they're into these established rosettes, they get to be very difficult to control. You need a fairly stout glyphosate rate to take care of these big guys. Back in that field of silage oats now, and it's looking pretty good. There's definitely more heading going on this week, even with the yellow dwarf going on in here. Some of these heads are just starting to fill, but progress is being slow. These cool nights is really kind of slow in development on it, as well as being infected with a disease that kind of does cause some stunting. Overall, we are supposed to have some days this week with pretty good growing conditions, so I still expect this to continue to fill out this week. But considering we're, coming up on the middle of October, there's only so much time left, so I think this is going to get cut at some point this week here because we're just starting to run out of time. Sooner or later, we will get a killing frost or snow. Here in this field of canola stubble, you can see this got sprayed with Blackhawk probably about 10 or so days ago. You can see we got really good control on the volunteer canola that was coming up at the time. However, there is some new stuff here that is just starting to emerge, but even it is starting to pick up a little bit of the 2,4-D residue and is not looking too particularly healthy, although it'll probably get killed by frost relatively soon, hopefully. You can see the mallow is being quite a bit slower. Some of these were fairly large plants. So you can see growing points are kind of bleached, turning that yellow color. So we are definitely stunting it, taking it down. It's just being very slow to show it. Soil temperature definitely starting to trend downwards in this Timothy field here where the ground is fairly well insulated. After last night's -3 frost, we are at just over 5 degrees Celsius. So that has definitely cooled down from last week. But let's go check a stubble field. In this canola field, you can see soil temperature is now at about 8 degrees Celsius at 2 inches depth, so definitely trending downwards from last week. However, it still isn't at full warmth here this afternoon. We're at 20 degrees here now, right at noon, so this temperature is still going to come up quite a bit. And if I pull this probe up to surface to measure the surface temperature, you can see that it comes up quite a bit. So we're at, almost 11 degrees there. So I bet you in another hour or two this surface temperature is probably going to measure 15, 16 degrees. So you can see we do have a whole lot of volunteer canola in here. We did have the frost last night, but right now there's very little visual effect at this time. So hopefully we'll start to see this stuff go down in the next day or two. Been getting a lot of questions today about canola like this. This is a volunteer canola, and you can see we're in the bolting stage here. So some of this stuff is getting pretty close to flowering. When the canola gets to this stage, it can be pretty hard to kill without a good dosage of 2,4-D or other group 4s. So in a case like this is just stubble, so we could always still come in with Blackhawk. New Farm is still guaranteeing Blackhawk to be safe ahead of canola for the rest of this month. So that is an option. You get 5 ounces of 2,4-D for a pretty good price that way. So that is a very good option. You can also use, like if this was in winter wheat, you could use, Barricade plus 2,4-D, Enforcer D, products like that. You're basically just gonna want to look for a stout rate of 2,4-D. Here's some hailed out barley stubble. This was sprayed with Blackhawk a couple weeks ago. It did a very good job at taking out the barley that was at 3-4 leaf stage, as well as the kochia and the mallow and some other weeds here, including this canola. This canola is pretty well hurting. All the growing points are all completely killed off. So this is still green, but it's basically dead on its feet. And the frost will finish off anything that has not been killed by that. You can see this barley is starting to come up and emerge again. There's quite a bit in the 1 to 2 leaf stage. This started just emerging again last week after that bit of moisture. So not too much we can do about this at the moment here. I'm hoping that frost last night will do a pretty good job at taking care of that, keeping it suppressed, but we will need more hard frost to do so. And now that I have the results from the lab on our corn trial, let's take a look at the data and see what it shows. Alright, so here is my results as I've put them into a graph. I've adjusted the yield all to 65% moisture here for the yield column to make things more even. You can see the Pride 1027 was definitely far and above the winner as far as yield per acre goes, coming off at 22.8 tons to the acre. The Pioneer Hybrid coming off at 16.4, and the North Star coming off at 17.3. So overall, pretty damn good for this area here. Once you get west of Lethbridge, corn yields are generally not spectacular. So 22.8 is pretty good. Now you can see the moisture as harvested. We have a pretty big difference here. The Pride 1027 came off pretty dry at 56.5. Whereas the Pioneer came off at 63 and the North Star came off at 62. So these ones are very good values for silaging, whereas the Pride 1027, if that was going by itself into the pit, might be a bit dry to ensile properly. Now all these protein numbers are, and ADF, NDF, TDN are all at harvested moisture as fed. So you can see here the Pride 1027, because it is a drier sample, is testing higher. Yeah, so that is looking pretty interesting. Then when I switch over to the dry matter results, which will give us a little bit fairer comparison, you can see here once again that Pride was the higher yield at 12.9 tons of dry matter to the acre versus 10.4 for the Pioneer, 10.7 for the North Star. Protein, you can see the North Star is higher, ADF, North Star is higher, NDF, the Pioneer Hybrid is the highest, and for TDN, the Pioneer Hybrid is also the highest. So now let's throw the milk calculations in there and we'll see how that looks. When it comes to calculating out the milk per acre, I must confess I have never done this before. If I screw this up terribly, please let me know. I used the Milk 2006 spreadsheet from the University of Wisconsin. Putting my trial results into this from the lab, I was able to roughly figure this out and then convert everything into kind of Canadian metric units. So when it comes down to, kilograms or liters of milk per dry ton, we have the Pride 1027 is producing 1616 kilograms per dry ton. The Pioneer is 1624, so that is the winner, and the North Star is 1611. So overall, a pretty tight race between them. They're all fairly similar. The Pioneer Hybrid just barely edges them out with some of those higher values from earlier. Now when it comes to milk per acre, this is where the Pride 1027 is really showing the benefit of that higher yield of dry matter per acre. It works out to 22,928 kilograms of milk per acre. Pioneer Hybrid 18,659 and North Star 18,697. So if quality is your major concern, if you are a dairy, you might really want to take a look at this North Star. Farther to the east, this might yield much better. But for some reason the 1027, the yield just really took it far and away above the competition in this trial. So this one overall, if you are a beef feedlot, this is definitely the one you would want to look at for a shorter season, but still a large and showy corn. The Pioneer Hybrid definitely kept up with the competition as well. And that'll be it for this week. Thanks for watching, and we'll catch you next time.